Welcome to the 7th episode of the Talent Intelligence Collective podcast. In this one, me, Alan Walker, and Alison Ettridge and Nick Brooks co-hosted an episode where we met the wonderful Lesley Rood, Senior Research Consultant for TA at Allstate. We got down into the detail of her approach, and amongst other things we discussed the importance of consulting, being an active listener to the needs of your client, and presenting information in a way that resonates with the recipient. Unfortunately, Toby wasn't able to join us, but he'll be back for the next episode. Have fun! Before we get on with the main event, I just wanted to remind you that this podcast is proudly sponsored by our friends at Stratagens, and here's a very well-spoken chap to tell you a little bit more about them.
Stratagens gives HR leaders the data they need to transform businesses with the speed and ease required in today's world. If you're ready to make decisions that aren't lengthy, costly, one-dimensional, or based on gut feeling, visit stratagens.com. That's STRATIGENS.com to register for a Wednesday demo drop-in and find out more.
Hello. I'm Alan Walker, and welcome to episode 7 of the Talent Intelligence Collective podcast. That's a little quick cheer from our friend.
Yay!
It works! Wonderful. This is our first recording of 2021, the second episode we'll release. And I think I could talk on behalf of all of us and say we're looking forward curiously to seeing how 2021 compares to 2020. It can't be much weirder. I'm delighted as ever to be joined by Nick Brooks of Microsoft and Alison Ettridge of Talent Intuition. But I'm sad to say for this episode, we're missing the inimitable Toby Culshaw of Amazon. We'll do our best to battle through, though. And of course, we also have our guest with us, Lesley Rood. Hi, Lesley.
Hi, happy to be here.
Welcome to the podcast. Why don't you introduce yourself to our audience?
Sure. My name is Lesley Rood. I work currently for Allstate Insurance as a research consultant in talent acquisition.
Perfect. Wonderful. Much more on that later. It's great to have you on the show. We've had some fantastic guests so far, but we're all delighted to have you here. So I think many listeners now familiar with the format. I won't over-egg that. In just a minute, in Toby's absence, Alison and Nick are going to lead us through a discussion of some of the interesting stuff that's happening in the world of talent intelligence. And then Alison and Nick again are going to team up on Lesley and fire questions at her about her career and views on TI. And I'll just sit around looking pretty in the background. So why don't we crack on? Alison, Nick, what's happening in the world of TI? Anything cool, insightful, interesting? What are you reading? What are people saying? Hit us with the good stuff.
Well, I can't take credit for this. So Toby, although not here in his absence, has collated the stuff that we should make sure that we're talking about. So I need to make sure that we give him credit, actually, rather than anything else. But there's one thing that I think is really interesting. There's a conversation that's going on in the Talent Intelligence Collective Facebook group. If you're not a member, you should join. There's some great stuff in there. And this talks about the divergence between talent intelligence as a consulting function and talent intelligence as a role that encompasses recruitment research, sourcing intelligence, and much more focused around talent acquisition. And I think there's some interesting views, but one view from David Carper was one major issue anchors to the credibility of those producing research. For example, are they even senior enough for an exec audience to view them as peers? And where those execs have historical reasons to believe, rely upon, or otherwise trust them. And I just think it's a really interesting point because it relates back to the power that talent intelligence could have within an organization, but whether or not actually the makeup means that there's a challenge in building credibility.
Oh, that is interesting. So let me get that right. They're saying there's a divergence between the consulting function that works more with the business and the broader organization, and that which works with TA.
Yeah, kind of. So it's a Facebook conversation, right? So it goes in all sorts of different directions. Right. But one of them is exactly that. It really is TI about consulting and joining the dots and informing a business strategy, or is TI about talent acquisition? And it's almost feels as if there's two paths that some organizations are going down and they're not combining them.
That is interesting. And I think it probably also, from what the original question sounded like, relates to those groups that work more with, let's say, data wrangling, or just sort of trying to find what information relates and then getting into some sort of order, and those groups that are more on the let's now apply it to the business situation or initiative. Does that seem like
Yeah,
it's part of it too?
Yeah, I think that's definitely part of it. I think that there's something about looking at the data and thinking how could that be used in different ways, and then there's something that's an overlay on top of that, which is linked to the view from David, which is how do we build credibility with the business
Yeah.
leaders. So there's two parts to it. I think it's just a topic that actually you could probably build a whole podcast out of.
Yeah, and that idea of building credibility, and of course, it doesn't come with it. It could start with your level. Like it sounds like that's going into. Do we even have people that executives see as peers? But I think acting as a subject matter expert that brings in labor market intelligence, industry news, and competitor moves. That's you can certainly build up to. I think it's not necessary to start with a level. It's necessary to start with that sort of both confidence and business perspective that I think a lot of the people I know in the TI space are trying to build and maybe have already. But it's the level thing is there, but the biggest thing I think that executives want to hear is, can you understand my perspective and help me, picture the future with this knowledge you're bringing in.
Yeah, and
You'd like to think in the more modern world of work that yes, there are still very hierarchical organisations where that level perhaps matters to executives, but I think generally many organisations are flattening out now, and you'd hope that the quality of what's being presented and any consulting advice that comes around it is more important than the level of the individual that's presenting it.
Yeah, and I think there's something here about just talking in the language of the business. That's something that Toby and Nick are really good at doing, and understanding what the business problem is that you're trying to solve, rather than kind of looking at the data and just presenting it for data's sake. And that automatically starts to build credibility, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it's exactly that, Alison. I think there's a lot of organizations that know they need it, but they don't necessarily apply the critical thinking to why. And I think there's this assumption that you can translate recruiting activity focused intelligence immediately to these kind of higher order business problems. And I think it largely comes down to the kind of acumen you need is that trusted advisory, right? Really critical thinking around what are the business challenges you're trying to solve, being able to lean in and understand and identify those issues and address them. And then obviously presenting yourself with clarity and confidence, right? So it's less about the seniority piece and more about your ability to kind of apply some gravitas, right? And kind of be able to talk to executives, derive the right executive summaries. And these are all skills, right? These are all skills that aren't necessarily pervasive across traditional TA functions. So I think organizations really just need to think about that, how they bring the right skills or nurture the right skills to enable consulting at that kind of seniority and level. But it's a journey. It's going to take time, definitely.
Love that. Do you want to talk about what Jacob has been talking about, Nick, or do you want me to do it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, it kind of connects, I guess, to the previous topic. So Sadish Nair is the CEO of ThoughtSpot. So they're a search and data intelligence company. And so no surprise, this quote is coming from someone of his position, but he's saying very soon, if you're unable to marry hard data with business context to define and execute a strategy, you're going to struggle in the workplace. The ideal candidate for businesses in 2021 and beyond will be a person who can both understand and speak data. Because in a few short years, data literacy will be something employers demand and respect. Those who want to get ahead are acquiring these talents now. My first kind of reaction to that is it's a little like Microsoft Office in the 90s. As a core kind of baseline skill among information workers, I think data and insights literacy is where we're kind of heading, and it's becoming a really core capability that's expected across all roles and all functions. But yeah, open up to the group. What are your perspectives? I think we're seeing a pretty tectonic shift, and it is a bold statement, but I think there's a lot of truth behind it.
I think that this one... Sorry, Lesley, you go ahead.
I was going to say, I absolutely agree. I don't know that that's even debatable. It's got to be something that you are trying to develop, or you're coming in with a certain level. I'm a little leery of making it the next big thing, because I think there's so much question about. I think it's the critical thinking piece. It's not, we kind of use these terms, I think, to be sort of, this is what you should know, which means people learn the vocabulary and then just start spreading it around. Whereas whenever we work with data, you have to have the mindset of, I'm using this to answer the questions that I've developed. I'm using this as a tool. I'm using data as a tool and not as a crystal ball, which can be sort of that's the danger to me of talking about it as the next big thing, or something that we all need to have is, but can we get a better definition of what it is in the first place, what we're asking?
It's a great point, Lesley. So data accessibility does not equal data literacy and capability, right? That critical thinking layer is very overlooked, and that's the part that enables individuals who can consult and lead and derive conclusions with data, right?
Yeah, I think that literacy is probably important to emphasize. Yes.
Yeah, and there's kind of another element to this, which is data is not the be all and end all. You know, I come from, you know, running research businesses with great researchers who find stuff outside data and then overlay that. It's that overlaying of the insight and the qualitative piece on top of the data that I think adds real value. So yes, sure, data literacy and understanding the data is important, but it's not, particularly for our function, it's not the only skill. We've just touched on gravitas and business communication and consulting. But then I've got this other view that says, you know, I read, in fact, Microsoft's report, Nick, on the impact of digital skills on the UK economy. And in there's a piece that says that digital skills now equate to 2.4% of a company's bottom line. And it was like, wow, actually, that's, yeah, and I know we're kind of going beyond data, but that's a really big number to suddenly be thinking about. You know, for every 10 million quid, there's 2.5 million quid that's directly linked to digital skills. You know, it's a really big topic.
And how many organizations who simply aren't prepared for that, right? They haven't necessarily invested in recent years for this digital push. And that's why we're seeing almost this zeitgeist moment through the pandemic of forcing a lot of organizations who haven't been digitized to really think about, how do we do that? How do we enable? And it's not just the platforms and the technologies, it's the skills and the literacy and the capability that have to follow.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And then
I do love that point though, Lesley, about the difference between literacy and what you do with that. It's like the world of literal reading, isn't it? You can be literate, meaning you can read. You might even be able to remember what you've read, but it doesn't necessarily mean you comprehend it and you understand it and you can take insight from it. You say it all the time with people online, regurgitating stuff that they've heard elsewhere to position themselves as experts. It's not quite the same as having walked the walk and understood that stuff and done it yourself and actually taken something from it and built it out and used it for a purpose. Just regurgitating other person's information is not the same as comprehending it even.
No, quite right. And then that leads into the Davos agenda. So which is going to focus, or part of it is going to focus on solutions that talk about ensuring that the future of work and societal disruption are both sustainable and inclusive. And therefore, to build back better from the pandemic, we need to close the skills gap. We need to make workplaces more inclusive, and we need to prioritise the health and well-being of our workers. And I don't think anybody is going to question that, but there's something for me particularly about workplaces being more inclusive and some of the trends that we're starting to see on diversity and those people most impacted by the pandemic.
It's really interesting. I was talking to a vendor of technology that helps organizations basically employ anybody anywhere in the world in a really easy way. I'm not going to mention names, it's not a pitch fest. But what was interesting was that they're positioning themselves, as well as being a vendor of this really, really powerful technology that's really easy to use and really simple and make sure people are compliant, is actually they've got this huge social agenda, and they believe that allowing organizations to hire people from anywhere in the world actually creates this massive balancing effect across the world, because people, if you live in, let's say you lived in Lebanon and you wanted a great job with a big blue chip company, in the past you might have had to move. You might have got to move to Paris or Berlin or San Francisco or wherever. But actually, if organizations change their mindset and think, okay, well, people can work anywhere, those skills stay in country, in town, in village, wherever it might be. And you start to have a massive balancing of where the money sits as well. Because those people might not be paid quite as much as they're being paid if they were physically based in San Fran, for example, but they'll still be paid a hell of a lot more than the people in their country. So gradually it drags up the average earning and distributes wealth much better. And I thought that was a really interesting angle to come at.
Yeah, it is. And I think what's really cool about that is starting to look through the lens of the eyes of the talent that you want, instead of just assuming that because you're a brand, people are going to come and work for you wherever you are. There's this kind of actually what's the stuff that's really important to the talent that you need, and how attractive is a location to them, whether it's the location that they are currently in or a new location. And then this kind of balance of, and how does that relate from kind of an earnings and a quality of life perspective, whether that's health and well-being or whether that's straight salary. I think it's a really interesting point.
Yeah, Alan, I'm a big proponent of that ideology. There's a non-profit that you should take a look at called Samasource, and their mission and vision is really about poverty alleviation, and they do it by connecting workers to digital jobs and tasks in underrepresented or underprivileged locations. And it's exactly that perspective, because if you give people opportunity and they remain where they are among their communities, they spend money, they then have that boosting effect on kind of their local community as well. And it's phenomenal, I think. And we're definitely seeing this is one of the big upsides of digital connectivity and technology, is that we can start to enable a more kind of equitable distribution of wealth and opportunity. So I hope we see more of this movement and momentum.
Yeah,
absolutely. It's only a positive thing, even on a much more micro level. We're seeing it here in the UK already. I have so many friends who used to live in London because that's where the jobs were. So they all went en masse from the Midlands, from the North, from the Southwest to flood to London. So there's this huge drain of talent in theory, because it's often the best people from those areas who are going to the biggest, best paid jobs in London. But I've heard from so many now that because their companies have now aligned themselves to understanding working from anywhere, remote working, etc., they're all going back to their communities. And they're quite happy to do that. And in fact, they probably wanted to stay there in the first place, but they just couldn't to get the jobs that they wanted. It's really interesting.
Yeah,
you just wait, Alan. As soon as sorry, Alison. I was just going to say, as soon as the pubs open again, you'll see the mass defection back in the other direction.
Yeah, we should
be. Country. Don't give me that. There are pubs in the country. Sorry, Lesley, you were going to say something way more sensible than pub.
We could stop and talk about that. I'm fine with it. If we can find a balance between doing the work that you want to do and also living the life that you want to do, or that you want to live, which is. And I understand that it is the situation in the UK with London being such a global draw. It's certainly the situation in California, where I'm from, and in so many other places where you just have this mass concentration of jobs and people, and that means that people are forced to live in tiny boxes without. It's just sort of a different life than they may have pictured for themselves when they were originally planning what their life was going to be like. So if we can have a better balance there. I did read an article, and that would be great, and I'm all for it. So whatever platform wants to talk about it, I think that's great. I read there's been a bunch of surveys conducted recently, I think, about, now that we're 9 months into so many companies having their employees working from home, how's it going? And I think one of the biggest concerns, certainly from the executive level, is how to create that idea of a business culture or work culture, if you're online, which makes me wonder again, what was it originally? If it depended so much on all of us being in the same room, what is that culture, and how are we not able to translate it to a different setting? I think that's something that we're going to have to work on.
Yeah, I think there's it's unusual for me to kind of do a straight plug, but people should have a look at the Strachan's maturity curve, because there's a bunch of questions on there that can help organizations understand whether they are looking at optimizing their workforce and their workplaces, which is kind of what we're talking about here. But to build on Lesley's point particularly, there's a business here called Leesman who runs something called the Leesman Index, which used to be linking an office environment to culture and engagement. And what they've done quite cleverly over the last year is look at a remote office environment and how that links to culture and engagement. And what they found was that the bulk of employees in organizations where the leaders were really engaging pre-pandemic wanted to go back to work because it was all down to the leaders and the leadership culture that they had built. Whereas those organizations where actually there really wasn't, a kind of a culture and the teams together, their engagement levels were lower, and those people did not want to return back to an office. They wanted to stay remote working. So it's a really big challenge. I think it's Leesman Index, a fascinating business.
That is, and the final point on the Davos comment you made, Alison, around prioritizing health and well-being. We're about to see a boom in employee wellness, I think, in tools, in processes, in consultancies. And I don't think it's necessarily new, but again, it's another effect that's been exacerbated by the pandemic, right? So I think that's kind of something that's been brought to the forefront, which maybe has been overlooked for too long.
Quite right. Chief People Officer, role elevated, and about time too, isn't it? Really, across all elements of people. Love it. Can we interrogate Lesley now?
Is it time?
Nothing else
Can
you
we go
want to
back to
talk
the
about?
pub conversation? I thought that was really going somewhere.
Well, Toby's written all sorts of stuff down on his news thing, but Lesley's here and she's way more interesting than the stuff. There's a whole piece on here about pandemic-induced economic contraction. I'm like, I don't even know what that means.
All right then. Let's say enough news, enough insights. Informative as it all is. We've got Lesley here. We want to know more about you, Lesley. I think it's time for our resident hard-hitting interview extraordinaires to step back up again. So I'm going to ask. I don't always ask this question, but are you doing good cop, bad cop this time?
Oh,
Nick, Alison, or both nice cop as normal?
Well, I was really irritated last time when we had Vibhu, and he kept saying every question that Nick asked, he went, "Oh, it's a really good question." I hardly got any of those. But I'm just aiming for the champion of the really good questions. That's what I'm aiming for.
So, Lesley, you know how to massage Alison's ego.
It's going to be awkward now if I don't say that. I got to write that down.
No, it'll be really awkward if you do now. I might just snort and think you're faking it. I don't think so.
Well, who's going first then?
Nick, do you want to go first or do you want me to?
Over to you, Alison. Go ahead.
Oh, you see, we should have talked about that beforehand. So I think there's something really interesting. When I was doing some research around this, because I've been dying to speak to Lesley for ages, was you talk about labour market, you talk about talent, and you talk about competitor information. And I'm really interested to hear from you about how you join the dots between labour market, talent, and competitor intelligence, or whether you see them as three separate boxes.
No, I think they're all related. I think there are times where we focus on one or the other, depending on the question asked. But labor market is kind of the holistic idea, of course, and that's where certainly in the work that I do currently, it just depends. Again, it goes back to the question being asked: is this a really holistic endeavor? And we're trying to, site selection. We're trying to base an office or something like that. And so all of these components come together. Or is this where we're trying to understand the talent, no matter where it is, and try to get a better read on either how to attract or how to develop or how to maintain, what it is, how to design a job for it, or a competitor, and how to compare ourselves with them, staff, or do our employee value proposition compared with them. It's just a sort of a deck of cards, I think, and which game are we playing at the moment? So I think that they're all related. It's just about which one comes to the forefront. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Perfect sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you've got a research background,
Yes.
which is kind of databases and library resources, and a teaching background. It's the first time we've had that combo, and I'd love to hear. Actually, it relates back to some of the stuff we were talking about earlier. What are the skills that you think you've brought from both of those areas, and how does that help you interact with business leaders?
Oh yeah, I think so. I think that's a really interesting part that I've heard through this podcast, as well as so many of the other channels that I've met talent intelligence professionals, is how just the variety of people and skills and approaches to bringing in external information to business decisions related to talent. Um, so in my background, yes, I have some experience being a substitute and summer school teacher in K-12, or in the U.S. what we call K-12, um, as well as like some tutoring work in 4-year colleges, and then a sales background as well, which is where I took that way of that idea of education and helped people make decisions through educating them about whatever I was selling at the time. And then now I have a master's degree in library and information science, and I think I apply all of that in the current role that I'm in. So it's about in education, you have to figure out as quickly as possible, especially when you're a substitute teacher, let's say that I'm faced with a class of 30 students, what are these 30 students individually doing? What are their motivators? What is their perspective? What challenges might they be facing? It's really sort of a ramp up of trying to understand perspectives and then respond to it. And of course, in a setting like that, in a classroom, you don't get to say, well, you're just not getting it. Whereas I think we see that a lot more in businesses, where you're held to sort of a standard, and if you're not meeting it, there's just something wrong with you. And of course, in education, you have to figure out what somebody's motivators are, or how they make decisions, or what their starting point is, and then how to move them to where you want them to be. So I've found that useful in my current role, and then in sales, where I had to really push a little harder to get that closure.
Yeah, as someone who's currently homeschooling a 7-year-old, that kind of, but you're just not getting it. It's something that I really
I'm done.
Jesus, don't get me started, please.
Is the 7-year-old saying that to you, or which way is it going?
Both ways.
And Lesley, you can choose not to answer this if you wish, but has your experience as a K-12 educator helped you deal with challenging clients and executives? I'm sure there's some learnings there as well.
The funny thing about working with students is they'll tell you when they don't understand, or when they didn't hear you, or they'll tell you because they know they're going to have to perform at some point. Working with adults, oh yeah, oh, that makes total sense, and then they'll go on to ask you a question that shows they didn't hear you at all. So that's the part where I'm like, it's okay to say I tuned out. Could you repeat the question, or could you repeat what you said? It does, and I think that's a lot of why is trying to understand. We talk about communication so much, and certainly in anything to do with data visualization, or you'll hear the term storytelling. Communication is such a misunderstood skill. I think we hear it more as a one-way street. I'm communicating to you, but if you're not listening, or you can't understand somebody's perspective, you can't ask questions that really pull them out and make them explain themselves, then you're missing a big piece of what communication is. And so that's seen more in trying to understand whether it's students or a customer that you're working with, or in our current role like the clients. It's just really important to try to get that perspective.
That's such a brilliant point, Lesley, because it comes down to that requirements gathering and being able to get to the root of how do you solve a business problem, know enough about it, why it's a problem, before you even think about what your solutions and sources will be. And it's that listening intently, it's asking great questions, clarifying, right? And I think that's such an important point to know. So I was actually going to ask you a similar question about your background, and I wanted to focus on the library and information science piece, because I've always been a real firm believer that those skills they're unprecedented in this world, and especially when we think about things like source identification, the integrity of sources, the layering of information, and then even taxonomy development, which we talked about with Vibu recently. But are there kind of core elements to, let's say, the collection and organization of info that you found from that academic experience really valuable for you?
Yeah. Yes. Sorry, I'm still thinking about your question. It's a good question, Nick.
Damn it. Sorry, Alison.
I think my team, which has, since before I've started, everybody on the team has had a graduate degree in you can call it library and information science. It goes by many terms. And where we tend to specialize is both trying to deeply understand information, why it's gathered, how the perspective or the you don't want to say bias necessarily, but yeah, again, why is this information being gathered in the first place? And that helps you understand what it means, what it doesn't mean, and then how to apply it, as well as more of the organization within your company of information. But we haven't in the past had as much of the, let's say, statistics or the computer science or some of the other. I think in TI you're seeing those fractures that we talked about earlier, like where specializations, where focuses. And so we have tended to focus more on sort of consulting and then presenting communication, being sort of, librarians are often called on in any setting to be sort of pop-up experts where you didn't know about something 2 days ago and now you're briefing an executive that's trying to make a decision with the context you're providing. So we try to deeply understand the information without necessarily doing as much of the hands-on, if that makes sense.
Great response.
Yeah. And Nick, you talked about then the fact that Vibhu was saying that Intel have built their own taxonomies. We know Verizon are doing the same from the conversation we had with Lyndon. Is that something, Lesley, that Allstate have looked at or considering might sit there in the future? Or actually you're saying we need to go what's out there in the big wide world?
The taxonomy is interesting. So I know that there's a lot of work on skills taxonomy. Is that how previous podcasters have used it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So a quick comment on that, actually, Lesley, because I think there's definitely a divergence in the types of taxonomy, because I think people automatically go to, it's a skills taxonomy, but even just the way that you classify profiles aligned to, say, a business priority or an organizational need is technically a taxonomy, right? So it's again like that classification of info, but interested to hear if you have a different perspective.
No, I think that's a good point in that it's about defining and classifying. We've done some work to try to define and classify the labor market info, the points that we're bringing in. When, if you're asked a question about retention, what are the points that we would be pulling in, and then how would you sort of apply them to internal data? So we've come up with data dictionaries, really, of external data that we're bringing in. I would love to see more about skills taxonomy, because I think that's certainly something that's important when you're talking about talent and talent of the future. How do we break down how we've seen roles or jobs in the past? How do we break them down into more of building blocks so that we can revamp a little bit more quickly for the future, if that makes sense? The other part of it, the more just like organizational content roles, I'm trying to figure out whether I should even put a toe in that water is kind of how I feel. Like, how deep is that puddle? It just gets, there's a lot of organization to be done, I think, with how we think about jobs and roles and within the organization.
Yeah, I agree. I love the idea, actually, of what data are we going to bring in and this data dictionary. I haven't heard anybody say that. It's just like, oh my God, that's just makes perfect sense for this. This is the data points that we need to bring in. And yeah, I think that's really cool. It ties into joining the dots, doesn't it? But the data dictionary, I'm going to take that one.
Can I ask a quick question to the three of you, actually? Ooh. You'll understand here, Lesley, that most of these sessions are about me learning about TI, because I literally started with no knowledge whatsoever when we first started. What are the advantages to an organisation building out their own skills taxonomy versus using something that's readily available?
Cool. I'll go first with that, if you like. Okay. And that is that there isn't one global skills taxonomy yet. Okay. I'm going to caveat that with a big yet. And therefore, there isn't really one size fits all. And so if you can't kind of find a way of relating external data to your internal data, then you might as well start to look at it in a different way and start building out, or the other way. If you can't make your internal data match external data, you might as well look at it in a different way. And I think it's only because of the future of work that people are starting to look at roles through a skills lens, because suddenly they're saying, well, which skills could be automated? But there isn't one decent global skills taxonomy anywhere. And the work that has been done is quite often done at a country level. So there's some really good stuff at a country level, but nothing that really works globally.
What complicates having something globally? Is it even basic things like language?
Yeah.
And how things are described as much as anything.
Well, I was talking about this on a webinar this morning. So take the skill of sourcing. Yeah. So if you think about sourcing in the world of talent acquisition, that's about identifying talent, engaging with talent, and the ultimate aim is to onboard them.
Yeah.
If you think about sourcing in the world of procurement, it's about identifying potential suppliers for you to meet your supply chain needs. Now, are they the same skill? Probably not. Are they transferable? Yes. One could argue. Are they called the same thing? Yes. And then what happens when you translate that into French is it gets even more complicated, because actually it then becomes something completely different.
Okay.
I wonder too.
And the hairy beast in the background of scale.
Yeah.
I thought you were talking about me then, Nick. Sorry.
Oh, here he is.
I'll put my jumper back on.
Oh, that's just more information than our listeners need. That needs to be cut out. That's revolting.
Thankfully, they're listeners rather than viewers, Alison. Let's just keep it at that.
Good Lord.
Sorry for lowering the tone. I'll be quiet now. No more questions or comments from me. Goodbye.
Sorry. Back to Lesley. I'm sure you had something very mature and profound to say before Alan jumped in.
I think you started there with scale, and then I think the point about the global piece of it too, like, can we just have one that works globally? Is you're going to see the same things we do with language, which is some cultures, some countries, they emphasize certain skills as pluses. You know, we certainly in the U.S. we place a lot of emphasis on being aggressive, on I don't even know. I have to step outside my country to understand it a little bit better. But you know, what is seen as a benefit here wouldn't necessarily be so in other countries. And so, can we have a taxonomy that removes some of that and just lets different countries or different cultures use a more like neutral language of skills that doesn't put too much emphasis on what's good or what's bad.
That said, we're doing some pretty cool work. I don't know whether it's going to ever end up surfaced in the platform, but we're doing some pretty cool work at the moment with some data innovation accelerators about looking at how you can use new technology to cluster skills, kind of looking at it through the lens of what does a skill mean in a particular industry, or what does a skill mean in a particular location, or what does a skill mean to a particular company. But it's really complicated. Actually, there is no one simple answer, and you throw thousands and thousands of pounds at it, and you still don't get a simple answer. So it's really interesting that companies are doing it themselves.
Yeah, and here lies the other issue. I think we've talked about this in a previous episode. Skills in isolation, do they tell you enough? Do they help us understand what an individual truly does, or how they apply that knowledge? It's a layering. So you often hear it referred to as an ontology in some ways, right? The hierarchical relationships between skills. And but yeah, I mean, you've got many different companies going after their own approaches, which is somewhat concerning, right? So there isn't a single point of perspective. But I think organizations are having to build their own, because they're trying, to your point earlier, Alison, to marry their own organizational view as best as possible to the external landscape view. And it's getting a little messy and crowded quite quickly, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right.
I'd like to see companies working more, or whoever, whether it's a vendor or a company, let's work with education to make sure that we're, again, can we flow this into it so that we're speaking the same language, and we're helping to build the workforce of the future with, people, organizations that are actually doing that. We don't want to be doing it in a vacuum and then see people coming in from universities that don't meet, what we think these skills are.
There's something really interesting in that, because at the moment, some of the taxonomies start with education data and then build out.
Yes.
But there's a real challenge with that, because, and you hit the nail on the head, Lizzie, that's not necessarily what companies need. So it's almost about saying, okay, well, let's take the skills that companies need and then let's work it backwards. And then, Nick, your point about the fact that it's layering, I think it's really interesting, because that comes back to the very first news item that we were talking about, which is, are you thinking about skills in terms of a talent acquisition and an onboarding, or are you thinking about a collective group of skills as part of a business strategic decision? And it's there's kind of two elements to it, isn't there? Really, it's are we looking at an individual level, or are we looking at an aggregated level, and therefore what's most important? That probably answers your question, Alan, about why this is so complicated.
No, absolutely.
Yeah. So.
Go on.
Is the future open source and having like an almost wiki-based concept where, as you mentioned there, Lesley, academic and educational institutions, governments, think about the Bureau of Labour Statistics with occupation codes. I mean, coming together with a consensus to build this, that's an exciting potential. In reality, I don't know how it would come together, but maybe that is the future.
I think it's so. MZ have opened up their skills, open source on an API,
and I think Workday have too, right? I believe. Or...
I think the two have paired up. I think, which is quite interesting.
Okay.
But I think the challenge you've got here is that the vendors that are doing the cool stuff, and I'm going to lump us into that, are literally spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on this, and you've got to have a really good business case for making that open source. And I think there's something about the pairing up with people analytics businesses and people analytics and some of the external vendors in that space that could potentially make it worthwhile. But that's a really long play when you're laying out funds kind of short, in the short term. And that leads into another question I've got for Lesley, which is Vibhu talked about Intel, a real integration between talent intelligence, talent acquisition, and people analytics. So the marrying of the internal with the external. How much of that do you do at Allstate as functions?
Yeah, that's a real challenge. I think at the moment we're a little further down the hallway from from other groups, and it's in fact just trying to figure out sometimes, like we were saying, the language that we're all going to use together is a big challenge. Yeah.
I don't think you're further down the hallway. I think they're further up the hallway, because actually but it's really, it's an important distinction actually, because when Vibhu started talking about it, we went, wow, that's probably the first time that we've heard an organization be that integrated. And I think that's the same, Nick. You probably say it's as true for your function. I don't know. I'm putting words into your mouth there.
Yeah, I would definitely say we could be much better integrated and speak the same language more often. Let's just say that. I think this is without doubt kind of an industry challenge. And I don't know. I think some of the challenges come from a lot of traditional people analytics functions have been more heavily focused around reporting than they have kind of insights and deriving conclusions and consulting. I think there's kind of that inertia in a way, I think, with a lot of traditional people and HR analytics functions, which is taking time to kind of evolve to outside sources of data and understanding of the landscape and how that impacts workforces. So, it's kind of a two-way street, but it's they're absolutely critical partners to us. I mean, we bring them in with all kind of projects and make sure that we're aligned on business context. But there's still more work to be done.
It's such a valid point. Sorry, go on.
I think that point about that you're making about, well, whether it's inertia or whatever the sort of last push of, how do we take this reporting, or how do we take this data that we just organized and made legible, and how do we make it insightful or action oriented for whoever wants to use it. And I think a lot of why that is something we see in our role too. It's a misunderstanding of the complexity of what we're trying to do. You kind of just think, again, once we get this data out, it will just communicate something to somebody. And it's that last step of whether it's understanding the business initiative and then being able to say what in this data is insightful to you, and here's possibly what you should be doing about it, or here's some actions that you can take. It's that it just seems it's so much simpler from the outside, and so planning to take that last step with the data is it's taking a while, I think, for people analytics to realize more that that's more of a step they have to take. That's my perspective on it.
Really cool. And I read something, I can't remember where I read it about you, Lesley, but it talked about I think the terminology was propelling actionable decisions, and I thought, I love that. Can you expand on what you mean by that, and if you can, give examples?
Did I say that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think you did.
You did now, Lesley. Claim it.
If you did,
Take the credit.
Do it. Okay. So
if you didn't, I've done my research wrong.
I'm just going to go back and look at my profile. So with that, I think that I read this great article on Harvard Business Review, and I can't remember when it came out. It was sometime within the last couple of years, not too recently, and it was called. It was talking about data science teams, really, and I think it was data science and the art of persuasion, and it broke into that sort of that last mile that I was saying, where now that we've got this reporting, what does it mean? How do we make it something that a business leader that is trying to do their day job and also make a decision using this data can use. So some of the things that it broke out the functions within a data science team and how some of them are sort of misunderstood and not highlighted as much. Everything from data wrangling and data analysis to communication, design, project management, business subject matter expertise, or whatever you want to call that. On our team, we are trying to take the data, understand the decision as focused in as focused a manner as possible, the decision of the stakeholders, and then help them picture what it means if they make the decision, using here's option A, here's option B, here's option C. And then they understand their priorities or their, where they've got budget, what they can do, and they can then make those decisions. It's a little bit, let's take all of this information and help you again picture what it would be if you make the decisions in these ways, because I can't tell you, I can't say here's even my recommendations are going to be very much from my seat, and so it's much more about trying to paint the picture for the executives. So I think that answers. Let me know if I'm wrong. Part A of your question. Part B, with a specific example, we've done some site selections things where we're trying to understand what they need in a location. So do you need just a huge volume of talent? Do you need advanced talent? Do you need specialized talent? How are you at dealing with competitors for that talent? Can you just take anybody? And I'm sure there are some people that you've had on the call, they can move to a site and just they can deal with whatever compensation they need to or have whatever competition. There are others that might need to be in a more focused playing field. So at any rate, what do you need in a location? And then we can start to build out a little bit. If you're moving to a place where you've got, let's say, medium levels of competition, you can expect, some retention, every once in a while, retention issues, every once in a while having to check your compensation, some of those other things that happen, but you can also have a better source of experienced talent. You can sort of, you're not having to develop the talent all for yourself. Whereas if you move to this place with no competition, you'd be prepared to spend more on training and on explaining your job, advertising yourself a little bit more. Like, here's where your budget would go, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And then when we work with clients on site selection, we're including things like what's your appetite for risk? So particularly when these are global site selections, what's your appetite for risk, and how important a language skill is going to be, and how often do your execs need to travel in? So some really basic kind of infrastructure questions. But if your execs are 8 hours on a plane and then 4 hours in a taxi, is that acceptable? And I think it's really interesting when you start to kind of bring in lots of different elements. That's back to your data dictionaries, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Definitely stealing that.
Yeah.
So, Lesley, when it comes to presenting and visualizing data, any top tips you give to our listeners on how to be most effective among senior stakeholder audiences and kind of how you present that and actually lay out the conclusions?
Wow, that is a good question.
There's a lot of great resources for communicating with data that we've tried to take advantage of. Simplifying, of course, is always good. Try to show what you're working on to somebody else and see where their attention is. Is that where you want their attention to be, or are they kind of, they're being pulled somewhere else? So simple visuals, context pulled out on the side so that there's something for them to refer to. Again, communicating as much of their perspective in it. Well, I'm sticking with slides because we're so PowerPoint happy, but in a slide is always a good thing where you're setting the decision. The data is not the point, of course. The decision is the point. So how can you sort of put the data in the background and the decision in the front? If you're making a site selection decision, let's have the criteria over here and the sites over here, and then we're sort of stoplighting, how each location meets a criteria, if that makes sense. So I think those are And then again, have somebody with a design eye or a visual eye to help you eliminate where you're getting confused.
No, that's brilliant. Sorry, go ahead, Alison.
I was just going to say, every time we run one of these, I scribble something down as a quote because I'm like, oh, that nails it. And the data is not the point; the decision is the point. Is one of those that I've just scribbled down. It's like that just nails it.
Write that down.
Yeah. How important, guys? Again, you've got more experience in presenting this to business stakeholders. Is that design element and what it looks like? Forget what it's saying, but what it actually looks like. Does that matter?
I can talk about it from a vendor perspective, which I think is quite interesting, and say absolutely, because particularly when we're dealing with big data, if it's not presented in such a way that means something, if you're just presenting data for data's sake, which is why I scribbled down Leslie's point, that it doesn't really tell a story. And in fact, just this afternoon, we've been messing around in the data science team with a client who'd got a question that was very specific. And so we were looking at something very specific in the back end of the data set. And we were playing around with Tableau as a result for visualizing it. And we looked at two different views, and one was kind of a bubble view and one was a donut view. I don't know how, there's probably posh words for those. And I looked at both of them and I went, well, when I look at that, my gut feel tells me this. And yet when I look at that, my gut feel tells me this. So we've got to figure out where we're trying to get to. It does matter, I think, particularly as a vendor.
That's communication.
So do even aesthetics matter? So 2 bar charts, one created in Excel, one created by a designer. Does the quality of how well it's presented matter as well? Have you seen in terms of how much people trust the information or respect it or think effort's gone into it maybe?
So a vendor perspective, again, is probably going to be slightly different. We spend a lot of money on report design each year because
UI, UX, everything.
Yeah, but also it comes back to that point, which Nick made right at the very beginning. Yeah, we are seen as consultants, and therefore you need to play in that field. And our competitors in the consulting world are the Big Four. And therefore we've got to be presenting stuff in such a way that it kind of matches up in terms of look and feel. We know that the power of the stuff that we're presenting is there, but it needs to have the look and feel, to have the gravitas when it lands on someone's desk, particularly in a world when we're not necessarily presenting it face to face or virtually, but we're relying on a report.
It's nature of humans, isn't it? Ultimately, my business, we advise people on HR tech, and the number of times we've seen the ultimate choice coming down to aesthetics to a certain degree. You could have 2 products that are pretty much samey in terms of what they produce or how they do what they do, but the one that the people go with is the one that looks best, looks beautiful, and that's human nature, to be attracted by that UI, UX, and the general experience of viewing something.
Well, and I think that point, Alison, about you were understanding it differently based on which visual you were looking at it's like, your mother, your teacher probably told you can have these great ideas, and if no one can read your handwriting, they don't matter so much. I mean, that's clearly not the case anymore, but it's the same idea of what is being communicated that you didn't intend. So it's
and it was fascinating how different they were. It's like, whoa, we need to get under this before we put it in a report.
Absolutely. And one of the other points you made as well, Lesley, about the business context being outlined and really clear. I mean, this goes back to our partner intelligence functions that absolutely need to be brought along on the journey, right? So people analytics are absolutely fundamental, because it's knowing what is the past story, successes, challenges, like what will we need to overcome if we're looking at a new site or new opportunity or other challenge we're trying to solve. So really just having like a cohesive story with all of the key partners that can provide business context is so key, because if you miss something and you get called out, credibility can dissolve quite quickly.
Yeah, building those relationships, I think, internally with people analytics, but with so many other groups is key to understanding how these things play out. And you can use, like you're saying, you can use their experiences as learning. You weren't there for that experience, but you're using theirs. So it's important.
Good stuff. Right, folks. I know I say this every single episode, every single time, but it's because we always have such amazing guests. So we could chat to you, Lesley, forever. Absolutely brilliant stuff, but we can't chat forever, unfortunately. We do need to stop at some point, and I think that time has arrived. So thank you, Alison and Nick, as always, for hosting this, our 7th Talent Intelligence Collective podcast. Lesley, huge thanks to you. You've been fabulous. How did you find it?
Oh, it was great. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Thank you all for your perspectives.
No problem at all. To Mr. Coulshaw, we look forward to having you back. This episode has been great, but we do miss you, honest.
Yeah.
And to our listeners, a huge thanks for listening. So the sign-out's coming. Stay intelligent, folks.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. Before you go, I wanted for the last time to remind you about our generous sponsor, Stratagens. Here's that posh chap again, telling you about their fabulous product.
Stratagens gives HR leaders the data they need to transform businesses with the speed and ease required in today's world. If you're ready to make decisions that aren't lengthy, costly, one-dimensional, or based on gut feeling, visit stratagens.com. That's stratagens.com to register for a Wednesday demo drop-in and find out more.